Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. It is so good to be back with you all at News You Can Use. This is Carol Maletta, creator of the Parenting 411, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. This past November, I had the pleasure of curating a moving anthology featuring 15 authors, all of them parents. They all contributed moving, insightful essays about their parenting experiences to what became the Parenting Odyssey: Trials, Treasures, and Triumphs of Parenting in a Pandemic. Over the next few months, I will be interviewing each of the co authors right here on News You Can Use. Tonight, you will meet Dr. Lakeisha Barrera Gibbs, an educator and mother of two. I have to tell you, I was struck by her story of not only how she helped her own children, but she helped others as well. Her chapter is entitled, My Kids Taught Me How to Let Them Learn. So, in just a moment, I am going to bring on Dr. Lakeisha Barrera Gibbs. Welcome, Dr. Lakeisha.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here today.
Yes. I've been very much looking forward to our conversation. So why don't we just start off by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, as you said, I'm a mom of two. I am so excited. I would say it's the most important job that I have. And so I'm honored to serve in that capacity. I'm also a wife of an amazing husband, Shelton, and my kids are Shelton Jr., 12 years old boy, and Victoria, who's 14. And I'm also a school administrator, and I support students 7th through 12th grade, and I've supported students from pre-K through college throughout my 20 plus years in education. And so my heart is really about children and families. And I'm also a parent education coach, where I support families as part of their educational team.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's something that you do mention in your story, but you were moved right at the very beginning of the pandemic when we really didn't know what this was going to look out like for our own families. But you right away felt the need to help others. Talk about that.
Absolutely. As educators, we're in here. We do our jobs because we love children first and foremost. And as I began to see the anxiety around the world and hear about the different needs and the different closures, such as different teams that were being postponed, I really started thinking about our children. And when I say our children, I mean all of our children, whether they're my students, whether they're my neighbors, whether they go to school with my kids, whether I just met a kid. I just see them as my children because that's my superpower, to serve them and to support their families. And it's a norm in my school and in any school that I've been in, is to always making sure that our students have what they need, whether it's in the school building or outside of the school building. And a practice that we typically have been doing at my school is making sure that our kids have food. We have a pantry, and it's part of our culture, it's part of our practice. And our kids who need food over the weekend, we make sure that they're not stigmatized and they have something to go home over the weekend or after school if that's what they need, or when they come to school, or in between classes if they're hungry. Because I believe that if a child is hungry, they can't learn. And so I started thinking about, well, teams are shutting down and things are getting canceled, and this feels kind of like it's going to be a snowmageddon in the spring, right? And we all know that in our area, when people talk about snow and we get all those weather reports, we start doing what? We go to the grocery store and we stock up. So I started thinking about the children, not only in my building, and I felt like my kids were going to be okay because that's what we do. We have a pantry. But I started thinking specifically about the children that go to school with my own children.
Mhm.
And I felt led, and I asked the counselor, I said, do you all have a pantry just in case kids don't come back on Monday or they're going to be out for a few days? And the counselor said, well, we have a few backpacks and I can support you. We can figure out how to get food and stuff them. And so that was the onset that really led me to just take the day off. And it was divine. And God said, you've got to feed these kids. So
Mhm.
what did I do? I went ahead and went to some of our local grocery areas and asked for donations. And it was so interesting because I would go to one store and they would say, well, how much did the other store give you? And I would tell them that information. And then they them. So little did I know. I mean, I started with maybe 11 backpacks, and then I had to drive back to the school and say, I need more backpacks because I have more food. And I wanted them to not have just the gummies that we give kids at school or the snacks that we give them. But I was thinking, well, these kids have brothers and sisters. I've got to get them, I've got to get them a loaf of bread. I can't just get
Right.
them a Dorito. So I just
Right.
really was thinking about, well, if they're out for a week or two, I want to make sure that the entire family has something nice and that those backpacks were filled with food.
Hmm. Wow. Well, I know that there are plenty of families that really have so much gratitude for you and your forethought. Because not only, I mean, this wasn't just a couple of weeks, but I'm sure at least during that first period, they were certainly, they felt comforted that they had food, and didn't have to worry about that, at least in the near term. So that is wonderful. I would like you to also talk about SEP Matters because that's something else that you started, and that's how we met. So talk about that.
Absolutely. So, being in education for some time, I've been a part of so many educational teams as a school administrator, as a teacher, and I've been on teams whether it's for kids who have learning needs or uh, parent teacher conferences, etc. And I began to think about the different resources that our school systems put into these teams.
Mhm.
And in particular, many of these teams cater to kids who have very specific, very unique needs that the school allots the resources to for those needs.
Mhm.
Well, during the time of virtual learning, I really felt like this impacts all our children, no
Mhm.
matter what. We're all dealing with some level of learning loss, or we're all dealing with some level of not being able to have their education differentiated, or them being supported based on where they're at with their learning,
Mhm.
because we're working with a limited amount of time uh, on screen with our students. I'm speaking as a teacher here,
Mhm.
and I knew that kids did not get the level of learning that they were accustomed to. So I started to think about those different teams that I have been a part of, and I said, I want to offer an opportunity to support all kinds of learners, not just our kids that might have specific learning needs, or not just our kids who need more challenge, but all of our kids, because all of
Mhm.
our kids matter. All of our kids uh, have been affected by virtual learning or have been affected by the pandemic or concurrent instruction, whether they were in school for a while or out of school for a while. So SEP Matters was born out of students, educators, and parents matter. And I truly believe, and it's always been this way for me and for my educator colleagues, that in order for our kids to thrive, we
Mhm.
all have to work together. We can't depend on just the schools, just the teacher. We can't put it all on the kid. It's not just the kid, the student, and we can't put it all on the parent. So we
Mhm.
really are a team, and that's what SEP Matter is. It is a parent coaching education LLC where I can support parents, educators, students, and it's really because they matter. And what that does is parents, I work with them, and I meet them where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
It really all depends. Every child is different. Every family's different. Every need is different.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. That's something that I used to talk about with families about 5 years ago, I guess it was now. A former company that I had with another colleague, we did a lot of parent engagement for middle schools in Alexandria. We worked with two nonprofits there. And that's what we talked about, that triad, the student, the teacher, and the parents, and really that teamwork. And just really, I used to even talk about how at the beginning of the school year, parents reach out and start that partnership and relationship from the beginning. I used to send out an email to my son's teachers right away, introducing them to us, and sharing little tips about what works well with my sons, and just really letting them know that there is someone else on the other side that is a partner with them, and that if they send any information home, then they can rest assured that it would be acted upon. And anything useful that I knew, I was going to share it with them. And so I think that makes, I'm not an educator, but I would imagine when you are an educator and you have so many students, that makes a difference. In terms of understanding that particular student that's sitting in the seat in front of you.
Absolutely. And it really is the secret sauce for success for our kids. It really
Hmm.
is.
Hmm. Yes. So let's talk a little bit. We won't want to give everything away about your chapter, because I absolutely want you before we leave to tell people how they can order the book from you. But can you share a little bit? I've talked to a lot of parents during this pandemic, and I've asked them, what did you learn about yourself? Because I think with this time of staying at home, staying put, we've had a lot of time for reflection and looking at the way we were living our lives prior to this and making some decisions. So, what kinds of things did you learn about yourself, if anything?
I would say the number one thing that I learned was how to be still.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. The work that I do requires constant movement, whether it's working with my kids here at home or working with my kids at school or working with families. I am
Hmm.
always on the go, go, go. There's always some type of movement, and just being still, just
Right.
really being still where where I was able to hear, I could hear the birds. I could
Ah.
hear the singing. I was tuned into the plants that were growing and what colors were outside. So
Hmm.
just being still and appreciating all of the beauty and all of the nature and all of the sounds is what I
Hmm.
learned most about myself, in terms of I was not hearing. I wasn't paying
Sure.
attention. And that was
Yes.
so valuable.
Right. Learning to be still. Yes. Thank you. And I want to say hello to Kamira Harding. She's watching with us. That's great. Um, Let me also ask you, what did you learn about your children? I heard a lot of parents saying that it was interesting seeing their children as students at home, because they don't really get to see that. I mean, certainly they do homework, but in terms of how they engage with learning and their teachers during the school day, that's not something they normally get to see. And just even other things that they learned about their children outside of school, just because families were spending more time together. So, how about anything like that?
Absolutely. I can start with a very basic. It's not just what I learned, but what I saw. Remember when they were babies, and we would wake up and they were a little bit longer, and it's like, wow, they grew out of the crib right before
Yes.
our eyes.
Hmm.
And as they get a little bit older, and they're in that, my kids at their age, they're in that stage where growing is not as fast.
Mhm.
And during the pandemic, I could physically see them literally growing before my eyes
Mm.
because my kids were both in elementary, and suddenly they're now in middle school. I mean,
Mhm.
in the middle of, I saw the change going from pre-adolescence to adolescence, because in the day to day and our hustle and bustle, we see them growing, we see them changing, but
Mhm.
sometimes we don't really pay attention
Mhm.
to the day by day changes minute by minute. So to
Mhm.
see my kids grow in front of me in a year and a half was amazing to have that experience.
Mhm.
Also, I learned that my kids taught me how they learn.
Mhm.
It's just so interesting because you think that you know the basics, the what I instill in them and what their teachers instill in them. You send them to school, they come home, they do homework or they're learning back and forth, and that's kind of what we see as parents.
Mhm.
Really spending the time to see how they learn and what their learning needs are was an amazing opportunity. And to really see and experience the differences between my kids and how different they are as learners, and
Mhm.
not just learners, but understanding what they need.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
because typically when I think about what my kids need when it's about school, I'm thinking about their school supply list, the clothes that they need to, what we're buying for school for them to wear. And this time I really focused on what their learning needs were. And my kids I have two very different learners.
Mhm.
One learner who is a super overachiever, and then I have another one who is a fidgety, just happy-go-lucky kid
Mhm.
who's falls over his feet. And my daughter just really needs socialization and
Mhm.
is very involved in the different clubs and activities at school. And then my son, he's more of an introvert, and they're just very different.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so just being able to support them based on what their needs were and are, and
Mhm.
it was a very interesting experience for me.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, let's talk for a minute. What was it like? What was your experience like? Writing the book and everything, and just and pulling those thoughts together and reflecting like that. What was that like for you?
It was absolutely amazing. I feel like I shared a part of my personal journal with the world.
Mhm.
I want to thank you for that opportunity, Carol. I think I've heard several of our co-authors have said that it was therapeutic, and I share
Mm.
that same sentiment and I echo it. It was
Good.
therapeutic. It was very reflective.
Mhm.
It was fun to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
It made me smile just to think about all of the quirky, fun things that we did as a family,
Mhm.
and just really thinking about giving back. I feel like that was so powerful because I know that there are families out there that can relate to all of our experiences, that can relate to my experience.
Mhm.
In particular, educators who are in a unique role, educating your children out there and
Mhm.
educating our children behind the screen made it
Mhm.
very unique.
Mhm.
So for me, writing my chapter, just it was almost like a virtual reality experience. And what's most
Good.
interesting is that we never got out of the pandemic. And so my chapter kind of continues because we're still dealing with some of the same challenges because, as you know, we've
Mhm.
been going back and forth still because we're living through it still.
Right. And it's interesting that you point that out because I had this vision to write this book, but it was like, when do you write the book? Because I was actually thinking, well, they went back, most people went back to school in September, and they're kind of like, well, the pandemic's over. Why are we? But I still felt like even if we were out of it, it would still be useful. because it's still about handling and confronting crisis. And we certainly have not seen our last crisis of any kind. There's always going to be a challenge that we're facing. And again, I was also thinking about the historical perspective. It'll be something to look back on that people can read about this time in history. So, but I was wondering, will people still be interested, because we will have moved on? Will they want to read a book about parenting in the pandemic? And, I'm not happy that we are still in this, but at the same time, I think that this information will be useful because families, they had some survival skills, they had some tips that they used, and they may be up for something new now. Like, they want to freshen things up and change things up a little bit because their family, has gotten used to that, what they tried a few months ago. Now they want to hear something new. And then just also to know that they weren't the only ones having challenges with this, that, this was something that we were all dealing with, and that we all can help each other. That's what I really try to do with the Parenting 411, is to really make it a community. So I am so glad that you signed on to the project. I really think your story is very important. I mean, it just wouldn't be complete without your story. And I'd like for you to tell our viewers how they can get a copy of the book from you. And I will also make sure to, or you can, whichever, drop it in the chat as well, so that people can order a copy of this very special book, The Parenting Odyssey.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to share how they can contact me. So my website's under construction. I feel like the best way for people to reach out to me would be you can email me at parent. I'm going to say it in 3 words, but it's one word: parent, school, teams, with an S at the end, at gmail.com. So it's parent, school, teams is one word at gmail.com.
Okay. Right. I think I've got that right, but you'll let me know if I didn't. But anyway, yes, I encourage people to reach out to Dr. Lakeisha to not only learn about, SEP matters, but to grab a copy of this book. You will be very, very pleased that you did. Now, how can they follow you on social media?
Absolutely. So people can follow me at Dr. Lakeisha. That's Lukisha on IG or on LinkedIn. And they can look me up on Facebook as well. So thank you so much for allowing me to share that information.
Sure. And, once we're finished, you can drop all of those handles in the chat as well, so that people will follow up with you. And thank you so much for joining me. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in to News You Can Use. Definitely be on the lookout. I will be speaking with other co-authors over the next few weeks. And I will also bring other topics to you as usual. And as always, please follow me at the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.